Okay, can I ask you to take your seats, please, ladies and gents?
I'll send you a link.
For anybody that's keeping more track of the time than I will be, it is now 5 minutes past when we should have started, so don't kill me when lunch is at 1:05. Just if you could take your seats, that'd be fantastic. So, welcome back after hopefully some welcome refreshments. I'm Peter Smith, I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at the charity National Energy Action. And like my fellow colleagues have said already, it's a great pleasure to be here in Liverpool. This is now my 14th annual conference at NEA, and I'm young in the tooth compared to some of you who've been coming here for decades and decades. But it's not an underestimate to say that I think that this is probably the most important conference that I've been to. We've heard this morning from the Energy Minister, the Minister for Consumers, about the passion that she has for helping vulnerable people, and particularly helping vulnerable people heat their homes. And that has been of paramount importance to this government as it has dealt with the aftermath of the energy crisis and the continued struggles that people have. It's hopefully come across today that many, if not all of us in this room share a passion for doing that job and that necessary job. And thankfully on this panel, in this session, I'm joined by people that also share that passion. First of all, we've got Jessica Skilbeck from the Department for Energy and Security and Net Zero. I think I got the acronym correctly. She's the Director of Net Zero Buildings. You've got Dhara Vyas, who's the, can I say the new Chief Executive Energy UK? Can I still get away with that? And yeah, good appointment, I would say. But we've known Dhara for years, and many of you will know her from her previous roles at Citizens Advice. And again, we've got Caroline Flint here. Caroline, you're very generous to come to our conference so often, and we always benefit from your insight about what we should be doing on fuel poverty. Whether or not the Minister can adhere to that, I don't know if she's still here. Is she still here? I was told that she is. Fantastic. Well, no pressure then, guys. We hope we're going to add a layer of detail to the discussion this morning and really drill into how is fuel poverty aligned to the government's wider missions, and why is this, we should frame it in the neutral, but why is this, I'll probably say, is this the moment to seize to reinvigorate our approach to fuel poverty? Not just in England, because we talked an awful lot this morning about England, but also across the other nations who also have fuel poverty strategies and national aspirations to ultimately end fuel poverty. And it's vital that we complement their efforts within the UK government, and arguably having such a passionate and informed minister and making sure that this is seen as an agenda across government sits at the heart of that new cooperation that could be achieved across the different UK nations to help us address fuel poverty. So, as you know, if you've heard my remarks before, I do like to dwell in the exuberance of my own verbosity and take full advantage of the fact that there's a microphone in front of me. I have actually shunned the opportunity of presenting 5 slides which I'd previously prepared, and I just tried to distill them down into one, which I'm going to hopefully bring up when I click this button. If it doesn't work, I'll get egg on my face. Yeah, that's me. So this is the only slide, hopefully, in my deck, and it just really very quickly just touches as a recap on where fuel poverty sits in relation to the government's wider missions. And I do think it's worth just articulating that at the beginning so we're all on working from the same plinth of knowledge, as they would say. So making Britain a clean energy superpower, we're well advanced on that mission. It requires the electrification of much of our economy and our housing, and it will be a major endeavour. We know if we're going to do electrified transport as well, we're going to need a lot more generation capacity, and because of our net zero ambitions, we know that that has to be low or zero carbon. And we know that that's not cheap, although it can be cheap at different parts of the day, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But energy efficiency and reducing our overall energy demand sits at the heart of that mission because it makes it cheaper and quicker to deliver. So we see energy efficiency and making homes warmer and healthier places to live as a vital enabler of that first government mission. It also speaks to the wider fairness agenda. If we make sure that energy is more affordable for people at the same time as looking to decarbonise our energy supply, we can demonstrably hold our efforts up to the rest of the world and demonstrate how fair a transition we've created on behalf of the poorest and most vulnerable people. If they can benefit, so can everybody. So I think, again, that's one of the major reasons why fuel poverty efforts and the government's wider clean energy superpower mission is so intertwined. I'll speed up a little bit. But we've heard a lot already about conference, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more, particularly tomorrow, about how health and housing are completely intertwined. Many of the practitioners sitting in this room will know that, and are acting on those synergies for perhaps decades. But increasingly, that recognition is coming home to government. The government have set out a new consultation on how to make the NHS fit for the future, and sitting at the heart of that is the prevention agenda. And sitting at the heart of the prevention agenda is our housing and bringing support closer to communities to try and make sure that we address the morbidity as well as the premature mortality that can be created by cold homes. And then finally then, perhaps this is the most instinctive one, it's breaking down opportunities breaking down barriers to opportunity. And for us, we put economic development as well as life chances within that bracket. And we know that if people struggle living in cold homes at a young age, their physical health's impacted, but crucially people's mental health and confidence to get on and be qualified, to have an education and then get that first job and get themselves on that ladder is massively affected. So we really welcome the fact that the Energy Minister is sitting on the Child Poverty Task Force, and I know that a huge amount of work's been done within DESNZ and within the Secretariat to make sure that those two things, ending fuel poverty and the child poverty strategy, are fully aligned. Anyway, I hope I've given you a bit more detail there, or just brought all of those three missions into sort of focus. And to provide a little bit more detail on what the department are going to be taking forward in the next couple of months or so, we're going to put you under a little bit of pressure to get a bit more timing. I know that it's probably not in your give. I'm going to hand over to Jessica for a couple of remarks, and then we'll move along down the line. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter, and thank you, everybody. It's always quite difficult to follow the Minister at something like this because she generally has stolen all the best lines, but I'll do my best. And I suppose what I would say is that I'm the official at director level in the department with responsibility for a lot of the things that she was talking about, and actually including the cross-government interaction that I'm sure we'll get into today, sort of working with colleagues in Department for Health and MHCLG on housing. So I'm really happy to answer questions on the detail, and there are lots of my colleagues here as well who you can pick up with as you go around the exhibition. I was also responsible a couple of years ago for the Energy Bill Support Scheme, so Adam touched on it in his remarks, but the universal support that was necessary because of the crisis. And I think, you know, very much drawing on the lessons from that and some of the themes that have already been brought up today in how we think about the work going forward. So it's a cliche, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It's really good to be here today. It's just a reminder for us in Whitehall of the human element of what we're working on, the references to homes and people, and trying to move away from some of the theoretical discussion that can sometimes characterize some of the trade-offs and decisions that we're looking to make. It really brings it home, sort of the testimony from the videos and talking to you. I was here last night talking to you about the work that you do much more directly with people that are living in fuel poverty. So thank you for the opportunity. Adam spoke in his opening remarks about the packages of support that you often try to put together for clients who are living in fuel poverty. And I suppose what I wanted to say in relation to that is that's what we're trying to do for the whole country in relation to the Warm Homes Plan. So as we try to fulfil the government's ambition to upgrade 5 million homes this Parliament, to meet our statutory targets on net zero, to meet our statutory targets on fuel poverty, it's that package of support, the balance between money to help people with their bills directly, what we're doing on buildings and fabric and the heat transition, and also how the energy market works for all consumers, but particularly vulnerable consumers. We're trying to bring all those things together in an overall coherent package. So in answer to the question on the screen in front of me, I think it is a moment of reset for the National Fuel Poverty Strategy. At the start of the Parliament, it's right that we're looking ahead at our strategic approach. We're shortly going to be consulting on that fuel poverty strategy. But then in relation to the Warm Homes Plan that has come up so much already, and I'm sure will continue over the rest of the conference, the thing that I wanted to emphasise is that it's not just a document. I mean, yes, you will press me on when it's going to be published, and there the big interaction, as the Minister said, is with the work on the spending review. But the work is underway now. We're not waiting for that to happen. So we're going to be consulting on the fuel poverty strategy. We're going to be consulting on really big policies that will contribute to that strategy. And I would underline again the work on minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector. And we're also really aware of the operational dimension of this, so how it actually plays out in practice. And the statement that the Minister made last week on the issues of non-compliance identified in Eco4 and GBIS are an example of that. If this doesn't work in practice, it doesn't work in theory either. And that's why coming to events like this, for me, is really important, talking to those of you in the supply chain who are actually carrying out this work day to day and understanding sort of the challenges that you face around it. So that's what we're doing. There are choices that will come through the Warm Homes Plan, and that's frankly where we need your input. So please do respond to all the consultations that are coming out. And I hope to get into dialogue now and through the rest of the sessions to hear your ideas as we take forward the work. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jessica. So, Dhara, I think we've heard a little bit about the way in which energy suppliers are still going to be crucially important to the delivery of the strategy. But first, do you feel it's the reset moment for national fuel poverty strategies?
Thanks, Pete, and thank you, NEA, for inviting me onto this panel. Look, just a little bit about Energy UK before I dive into what's actually quite a massive question. Energy UK represents generators. We're technology agnostic, so we do represent gas generators, nuclear, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, and we represent the suppliers. So we represent the companies you probably all work quite closely with, some of you in the audience, the ones who are really engaging with customers, who have the job of being that kind of front door to the energy system for customers. And we've got lots and lots of businesses in the membership who work right across the system in different ways, whether they're talking about flex and aggregation, heat pump manufacturing, EV smart charging. The reason I set that out before I sort of start to respond to the question is because for too long, I think this bit of the conversation has sat with the suppliers, and I think actually we are at a moment where the conversation about demand, the conversation about how we engage with people in relation to the energy transition, and part of that is fuel poverty, is much bigger than that, and our members know that. So I think what I hope you start to see in terms of a shift from the industry is a sort of step into really thinking about how we engage with people right at every point through the kind of system, because I think that's really, really important. Is it a reset moment for the National Fuel Poverty Strategy? Look, for those of us who are slightly long in the tooth on all of this, we're used to lots of strategies, and as Jessica said, it isn't really about the document, it's about how we live and breathe it, and it's how we put it into practice. I do think that it is. I think that the slide you set and the kind of task around thinking about the government missions and the ways of working is a really good way of thinking about it, because the reality is if you tackle fuel poverty, you're hitting so many different vectors which actually just completely put people in a terrible situation. So fuel poverty is almost the way in, but then actually what you really do see is this whole picture of somebody's home and household, and the impact that not being able to feel warm, safe and comfortable can have. So I hope it's a reset moment. I hope so, because we are in a really difficult point. Debt is at £3.9 billion to energy suppliers. Affordability continues to be an issue. So the title of Beyond the Energy Crisis, the reality is that cost of living crisis that was really kind of kicked into play following COVID and the energy crisis and during the energy crisis, it's got a really long tail. It's really, really still affecting people. And our members know that. The suppliers know that because they speak to their customers. So I do hope this is a reset moment. I think, you know, what I would say is that the two big principles that should guide all of this work, and actually the work we all do, and in the conversations we have with government, have been around ambition on one hand and partnership on the other, because the reality is none of it can be achieved by government alone, by civil society and charities and consumer groups alone, or by industry alone. So I think that partnership bit is just going to be really, really key. We need to sort of go back to a space that we used to talk about a lot more, which is that social value, social capital of all working together. So I'm quite keen for us to be thinking a lot about the role of industry in that conversation. And I think ambition and partnership guide the three things that I would like to say about the fuel poverty strategy. One is, I was really pleased to hear the Minister talk about data matching. We worked long and hard on trying to unlock kind of a path forward on data matching, because yes, suppliers do hold a lot of data. It's held in silos, even things like PSR data, debt data, and eco data, it's all held separately. So are there ways we can unlock that? And then conversations around, you know, debt relief and how DWP, NHS and HMRC data can help us to better find people and target that help is just going to be so important. The Warm Home Plan, the point about partnership there, I think, is that many of us have been in rooms where we've talked about eco isn't perfect, but it's been the only thing that's delivered over a long period of time. And I think Eco 3, to the end of its period, treated 2.4 billion homes and gave people a lifetime saving of £19.3 billion. And I think that's not an amount that we should sniff at, and we should really kind of recognise the value of what eco has delivered. It is not me saying it's perfect. I do not think it's perfect, but I think that it's the only thing that not only has delivered values, but it's kept supply chain going, it's kept those skills growing as well. Probably not at the pace and scale we need, but we can ramp them up. If we shut it down, then we will not be able to maintain it, because it is that regularity, it's the certainty that encourages businesses to invest. And then I think the last point I'd like to make is just around the vulnerability commitment that Energy UK runs, because before the crisis in around 2018, 2019, before I joined Energy UK, they ran a really long and deep vulnerability commission to really reconsider the role that energy suppliers have in this space and think quite carefully about what's the value add from the industry point of view when you've got lots of regulation and license conditions in this space. What is the extra? What's the above and beyond? What's the innovation? And how can we share loads of that best practice? That commission was chaired by Lord Whitty. It went on for a while. One of the big outcomes from it was the vulnerability commitment. It's now been in place for 4 years, and it's, in my view, it's got an independent panel. We had Steve Crabb chair it. You often heard from him at these conferences, and he was excellent. But what we do recognise is that society has changed. We've been through an awful lot, and we think there's a space for the vulnerability commitment to drive best practice and to really kind of push suppliers to think quite carefully and demonstrate what they're doing, but also work with other partners, and that's been one of the themes for this year. So we've just announced that Paul Spence, who recently retired from EDF, has taken over as chair of the commitment, which I'm really, really excited by. He's got loads of industry experience, but he also really understands the customer, and I think he'll bring a different lens to this and help us take it through the next phase. So those are the three areas where I think actually this is where industry is trying to make some steps forward. We just can't do it alone, and I think it's all about partnership.
Fantastic, Dhara. Thanks for those remarks, and it always gives me encouragement when you hear you talk that someone with your background and clear passion around energy consumers and their interests should be sitting at the heart of supplier practices moving forward. So thank you for those remarks, and we'll come back to you. Now, Caroline, you would have heard the Minister reflecting, no doubt, on your previous roles in government. Now, do you think a lot of this is ministerial enthusiasm, a bit of optimism bias because you've got to be seen to be enthusiastic and keen in your role, or do you think this is the moment?
It has to be the moment. It has to be. And our report last year, 2024 annual report, the title was "Can Fuel Poverty Be Ended?" And that was a question that came up from colleagues in the audience to the Minister. And I believe it can be ended. I think there will, let's be honest about it, I think there will always be some households, some individuals, for lots of reasons that are very human, that might find themselves through the net. So we will always need, I think, those safety nets, that good customer practice that is always proactive. But quite frankly, I mean, we're talking about getting net to net zero and all that that involves. Surely we can end fuel poverty. We can put people on Mars, apparently, but we can't sort that. And I'm reminded of when I was Shadow Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, asking the then Secretary of State, Ed Davey, I thought it was a pretty obvious question, which was, how many homes in the UK are insufficient when it comes to insulation? And he sort of batted it away, really. And I think that has been part of the problem, is that I find, and my committee finds, that we've got two really good ideas: net zero, getting to low carbon, ending fuel poverty. But sometimes it feels that the efforts to tackle fuel poverty, and we've seen this in the targeting of fuel poor households in various schemes, eco and others, we feel fall short. I'd love to have a situation, Peter, where talking about lagging was as sexy as talking about pumps. Because often it's seen as something that's not as modern, not as cutting edge, but fundamentally, as we embark on the review of the fuel strategy, and that couldn't come any later than it is, because it's really needed, and that's why this reset moment is so important, is the fundamental drivers that create fuel poverty are living in cold homes and not being able to afford to pay the bills. And part of the connection between those two, as you all know, is that so much of the money that people who are in fuel poverty or low incomes pay to heat their homes, they never see the benefit of all, because it's literally seeping out of the fabric of the homes that they're living in. And that is about the lofts, that is about the walls, it's about the windows as well. So many people, we don't often hear about that. So many people are still living in single glazed homes or with pretty dodgy double glazing that was put in many, many years ago and isn't fit for purpose. And, unless we fix that, there is no point putting clean heating into those homes when that job isn't done. That's why the Committee on Fuel Poverty, we are not setting our face against clean power and getting to net zero. But we do feel that actually here is an opportunity to align what we need to do for fuel poor homes, but it shouldn't be with that ambition, but we shouldn't. The test will be in 2030, how much of the Warm Homes Plan and other initiatives will bear down on those homes that are still too cold. And that's why it is encouraging, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed here, it is really encouraging that the Minister has come out on the front foot in the department in relation to the private rented sector. As she quite rightly said, 1 in 4 households in the private rented sector are in fuel poverty. It's a product of the system that we haven't built enough social homes. So the money we used to put into paying to build social homes has gone into paying rent, often through the DWP. It's an irony, isn't it, that it's going round in circles like that. So it is really important, this moment we're in. Just to remind people, it was a government introduced a fuel poverty strategy in 2001 with the goal that it would be completed by 2016. So if anything, and maybe it's just the grey hair and getting that much older, is I listen to discussions around this and other areas of public policy and social policy and economic policy, and I'm afraid I do have a sort of sense of where the bodies are buried, because you remember what was said. Now, there's no point harking back to that. We have to make sure that in this moment that we are all alive to, and of course the department and ministers as well, is to learning from whatever the best intentions, what didn't work, but also what did really work and what were the ingredients to make that work. And you know, as a Fuel Poverty Committee, we're really pleased that in the last few years we have focused our research projects on actually how people react to the policies that exist. So in 2024, our project was about looking at the enablers and obstacles to fuel poor households, taking up, if you like, the sort of net zero clean power agenda. And I think, again, it was very much focused, and lots of organisations probably in this room, I know the NEA and others, helped us with that. But what really became clear is, you know, with the best will in the world, if your house is cold, if your flat is cold, talking about putting in a heat pump is not the solution. But not only that, quite frankly, not just for those in fuel-poor households, so much of it just is over the top of people's heads. The trust issue, who do you trust to come into your home to do this? Whether or not it's being paid for you through a programme or whether you're being asked to pay for it yourself. And clearly, obviously, that's not just around clean power, the issue in terms of solid wall installation that we've heard about in the last week, and ECO and GBIS, is a testament to the importance of accountability and assurance and good governance. And within that, who are the people, who are the organisations best placed to make sure that that happens? So successive governments have committed to the goal of quality of home, stability of energy costs, financial support. But the reality is, whilst we had some progress from the sort of 2010 onwards, and maybe that's worth looking at about the low-hanging fruit in that space, the numbers of people no longer in fuel poverty has flatlined. The costs are £700 to £800 higher still, energy bills, than they were before the pandemic. And, you know, let's be honest about it. To make the market work, to encourage investment, there's more that is being asked of bill payers to pay a contribution to those energy generators in renewables and low carbon power. So it is a really important time. Earlier on, obviously, the Minister answered questions about data sharing, targeting. Yeah, we agree with all of that. I think the question, you know, needs to be, there is loads of data. What is stopping you sharing it? Never leave a meeting without having a clue about what the answer to that question is. But also, don't let too much data obscure the importance of delivery on the ground. Because you can have the data, you can find the people, but is the execution to actually engage with households, to engage with local partners, isn't good enough. The yin and the yang don't work together. And from what I know of being a minister myself, and I had various roles, but I remember as a public health minister, I wanted a public health minister in every department. It would be nice to think we could create one massive department to do all this, but that would be ridiculous. So what is it we have to do to break down those silos, and not just amongst officials, but amongst ministers as well, to make better outcomes achievable? And part of that is about the policy and the strategy. And in some ways, in terms of the fuel poverty strategy, it's a reset. I chair an NHS trust. We do mental health and community services. And we just had a look at our strategy, and we were very keen to not call it a new strategy, rather a refresh, because actually the same challenges were there. And I hope in this the language will be in that form as well. But in reviewing that strategy, you know, part of it is to reset and learn, but also to really challenge the orthodoxy and the assumptions about how all the players, all the intermediaries in this alliance to end fuel poverty, how they operate and how they play. Sometimes it's as much about cultures in those organisations as about practicalities. Are the energy suppliers willing to change their culture to enable maybe more local delivery and ownership and management of those eco-funds to get the job right, to make it work and make it happen? And those are the sort of questions everybody needs to ask themselves about where they're willing to release control, where they're willing to be more agile and responsive to those local needs and communities. I'll end on this. For us, this opportunity of missions is really important. And I think it is really powerful if, not just on fuel poverty, but on other areas of economic and social policy, that across Whitehall, they can set an example to what happens regionally and locally, how actually you can work together. How you can say, what is it we're trying to fix? How does the DWP fit into that? How does health fit into that? How does DESNES fit into that? How does Department of Education fit into that? But not only be able to answer that individual departments, but to work within a culture of actually wanting to do the best, to wanting to have the outcomes. They have to ask themselves the question at every meeting, so what? So we've had a really great meeting, so what? What has come out of it? Are they going to have identifying the measures that will be able to tell us whether things have been a success or not in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years' time? Where's the agility within it to take a different path rather than digging the same hole over and over again? And I think if they can do that, I feel really positive, because it is a different approach to solving these enormous problems. And they're not just problems about paying bills and feeling cold. We know from research that we've seen that, for example, amongst young people, if you're living in a cold home, that will contribute to your mental health. That will affect you going to school. That will affect your learning. We know that it exacerbates ill health. We know it's a major cost to the NHS. So again, it's about really understanding how the interplay between these impacts on people's and families' lives has an effect on their well-being, but also their opportunities in life. And again, I think on the fair transition to net zero, I honestly don't feel we're at the stage at the moment where that transition incorporates tackling fuel poverty as a key principle of what it should all be about, which is why we say that there can be no fair transition to net zero unless we take the fuel poor with us, and the starting point for that is enabling them to pay their bills and support them financially, and we heard a bit about that later, with different ways to do that, but fundamentally make their homes warm, insulate them, make them warm, and then you'll have them as ready partners to go on to the next stage.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Caroline, your passion's undeniable, but also your just the sprawl of understanding and insight on all of those topics is vital. And I think it gives us at National Energy Action a lot of confidence to know that you, as the chair on the Committee on Fuel Poverty, are the recognised group that the government and the minister in particular should adhere to. Now, we know that the current strategy is out of date. It was produced, when was it produced? Actually, someone tell me, anybody bright spark, 2021 was it?
21.
Yeah, and we know that it references things like £10 billion being contributed towards investment because of rental standards in the private rented sector being raised to EPC Band C. That was a commitment that was first made in 2017 in the Clean Growth Strategy, and we're still waiting for it. Now, if we don't see that consultation soon, it could be another year until we actually put it in the hands of those people, the local authorities, that are going to be the ones that actually deliver on that. So, question to you, Jessica. Where have we got to in terms of getting that signed off? And will it be imminently published? And how much longer do we have to wait? Is it going to be another 8 years until that's published, perhaps?
No, not 8 years.
Good.
So it is really imminent. It's really in the final stages of cross-government agreement. I can't give you a direct
Exact
time
date.
frame. We had hoped that it might have been published before we were here today, but it hasn't been. But absolutely loads of work has gone into it from my team and elsewhere, very much building on the consultation that was done in 2020, so that we're not sort of starting again. And the sort of questions that we're going to be asking are around, so it absolutely takes forward the commitment to raise to an equivalent of EPCC by 2030, but it talks about the exact time frame between now and then for doing that. It asks questions about the relevant metrics, particularly in the context of the consultation that's out at the moment on EPC reform. There's a big interdependency there. It talks about transitional arrangements, things like grandfathering and any exemptions that might apply. So I hope that gives you a sense of the sort of detail of the work that we've been doing. It isn't stalled. It's a really big commitment on behalf of the Secretary of State as well as the Minister. So imminent really does mean imminent.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, we'll take some encouragement from that. And yeah, it was only committed to relatively recently in the party conference period with a quote carried by the Prime Minister, I believe. So it will happen, but we're obviously anxious to see it. One word you didn't mention, which I think is concerning, is enforcement. Now, these things are only as good as, you know, how much you enforce against them. Now, as well as your own view, I'd really welcome, particularly Caroline's view perhaps, about what we could do to strengthen enforcement, which we don't really know, but we assume hasn't been particularly a priority within local authorities who have had the absolute guts ripped out of them in recent years. So how are we going to strengthen that and take that forward? And as well as your own view, I'd like the view of the rest of the colleagues, if that's possible.
Yes. So we absolutely recognise that the standards are only as good as the enforcement that sits behind them, and that as with lots of devolved areas of responsibility, it's going to sit at a different position for different local authorities in terms of their priorities and therefore sort of the focus that it has had to date. I think it will have come across in what the Minister was saying, sort of her commitment to a very strong local angle on everything that we're doing, and that extends to the question of enforcement, because we know, and I imagine this is the experience of people in the room as well, that it's sort of that contact with the household. It won't just be about the quality of their accommodation. It will raise all sorts of other issues that need to be tackled in a holistic way.
Fantastic. Dhara, I don't know if you wanted to come in on enforcement, but Caroline, particularly interested in to hear your reflections on how enforcement in local authorities could be a bigger priority and drive that progress forwards.
So this is really the nub of any, I think, public policy from government that emanates from government, is how does that translate into delivery on the ground, where actually often it will be the local council, pretty much, who, for lots of this area of the built environment particularly, will have a role. And we all know that, you know, there are some big local authorities that have, you know, pretty good planning departments in terms of capacity and size, and in other ways, and others that don't. And I think this is a challenge. I mean, you know, policymakers can keep making regulations and laws, but unless you've got actually people to follow it up on the ground, whether that's through individual consumers being empowered to do that and be heard, that's one thing to get them to do something, but are they being heard? But importantly, I think with the built environment is about, you know, active engagement. I mean, it's very worrying in terms of what we've heard about last week and the Minister made a statement on, that so much of the checks, and I suppose Grenfell was a bit like this in the whole cladding situation, was based on people not actually seeing for themselves what was going on. You can't have, with the best will in the world, diligent and well-meaning officials in Whitehall or agencies that are based nationally being able to see what's happening on the ground. So I think there has to be some thought given to what is it who are you asking to do the enforcement, and to be honest, what resources are you going to give them? When we, and myself in the Department of Health, introduced the smoking legislation back in 2007, it was a major success, partly because actually the public were brilliant. They were pretty much our own enforcers. But actually we did a huge amount of work with our colleagues, environmental standards officers, with local government, with different parties, with different parts of the hospitality industry and else, to actually make sure that where we could give them money, but also we were clear about what we were expecting of them. And I think that has to be a prerequisite for any policy that impacts on people coming out of Whitehall.
Spot on. Well, Dhara, sorry, did you want to come in on points about enforcement or anything to do with PRS?
No, I just was smiling when Caroline was speaking, because when she was doing that, I worked in a local authority, and one of the things I did was work on health action zones, and the whole point was you brought together agencies in a local area as well as work with national government, and it's really hard to do, but when you get it right, you see the fruits of it quite quickly.
Well, I've got to say that I think anybody that read the BBC News this morning will know that the urgency that's in the private rented sector is particularly acute in temporary accommodation. Sadly, temporary accommodation is estimated to have claimed the lives of 74 children in the last 5 years, which is a shocking statistic. And some of those are directly related to damp, cold and mould. And so we can do something about it. So I think if we can all push very, very hard, if not just once we've got the consultation published, we don't get the result swiftly to implement that and get it in the hands of local authorities to actively enforce against, we'll have failed to do our job collectively. And I hope that we can work together to make sure that the interests of landlords are counterbalanced and that they see that there is a clear financial interest but also a moral interest in making sure that those regulations are implemented swiftly, having had 8 years of delay.
Peter, can I just add just one other thing? I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's 8 years. I mean, when I came in to chair the Committee on Fuel Poverty, we were waiting for a response from government then. So, I don't think any of Jessica or colleagues are under any illusion how important this is. But again, as well as enforcement, how at a local level as well can you find ways through other policy areas? For example, there's been considerable work done on, for example, tackling antisocial behaviour in communities, and often where there's PRS, particularly in neighbourhoods where that is present. We know that ALMOs and housing associations are gripped of that. We know there's the cold and damp home situation. We just need to make sure we can align fuel poverty in the mix there. We don't want people reinventing the wheel and creating some new, subset. We want it to be an integral part of what they do. And that's how you get value for money, and that's how you create staff who have not a one-trick pony that they do. They actually can see the bigger picture of how this is affecting lives. And key to that as well, to be fair, there are some landlords who, actually need help. And so I think there's enforcement, education, but also encouragement. What are going to be the carrots and sticks to make this work? And some people will need more sticks, and some people need a few carrots.
I think we heard earlier about the potential for an agency to be some sort of galvanising factor in terms of drawing those carrots and sticks together. In Wales, we've long since reflected on the value of having Rent Smart Wales that's there to galvanise local authorities to individually meet their housing responsibilities. So that's action on the Health and Housing Safety Rating System, HHSRS, their Wider Housing Act responsibilities, so licensing and enforcement against the minimum energy efficiency standards, and by providing practical advice to landlords in terms of those responsibilities that they hold, and notifying the local authority and giving them data about where there are potential enforcement cases in their area, and a steady advertising campaign or marketing campaign around the value, around avoided rent arrears, avoided void periods, that type of thing. They've been able to halve the amount of F&G rated properties within a couple of years. So I think that hopefully that's a model that central government can look at and either build into the Warm Homes Agency or the Ombudsman, Housing Ombudsman that they're considering within MHCLG, or even it could be embedded within a bigger local authority to provide that encouragement, but also that strengthening of the real responsibilities that both landlords and local authorities have in that regard, and hopefully we'll see a bit of progress on that. That deals with, say we get the rented sector right, and we haven't really spoken enough about the social housing sector, but it's pretty good energy efficient-wise anyway, isn't it? So we'll just let them crack on with that, we hope. He says optimistically, probably get shouted at for that later. But that deals with 1.5 million fuel-poor households, approximately, I think, in the rented sector. And we've got 1.2 million more to do, according to the fuel poverty stats that are in their own homes now. We've heard a little bit about the schemes so far, a little bit hazy on the detail because we haven't seen the Warm Homes Plan, but we know that The home upgrade grant is it's been rolled into the wider local authority delivery stuff. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. And we know that SHEDIF's continuing. I don't know if this is the police coming for me or you, but the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, that is continuing.
That's right.
And there's a new grant scheme, isn't there, for ancillary works, is that right? Or some sort of enabling works? Is that the 400 million? Or was this the sort of the undecided pot that...
So the ones that you've referred to are the ones that have been confirmed already in the first phase of the spending review and as part of the 3.4 billion that the Minister referred to. So we've got 3-year certainty for the Social Housing Fund and the Warm Homes Local. And we are an exception in the departmental budgets to have had that sort of forward look. So one of the things that we hear all the time is, please can you give us certainty so that the supply chain knows where to invest? And we try and relay that as loudly as we can in conversations with Treasury. The rest of it is for determination along, as part of the Warm Homes Plan alongside the spending review. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that the decisions on capital funding from government are seen in the round with decisions on regulations and the future of the supplier obligations, so that we genuinely have a strategy where the various elements complement each other, rather than, we absolutely hear the accusations of sort of stop-start, piecemeal, fragmentation that doesn't lead to the best learning, as others have said, from what has gone before.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that response. Has anybody else got any other sort of reflections on, we've got a couple of schemes out there at the moment. We do have this 3 years worth of certainty in terms of capital, HMT capital-y driven schemes. Less certainty about the extension of the energy company obligation and the next phase of that. Will it continue to be fuel poverty focused or low income and vulnerable focused? Will it continue to channel, £1 billion, or is it £1.5 billion because it's GBiz? Less certainty around that. But we're still shy, aren't we?
It's a very, very live discussion with ministers at the moment. So quite literally, I'm getting the train back this afternoon to continue that conversation with the Minister and the Secretary of State about how these various elements fit together. ECO, for all its imperfections, has been a really big success in terms of the volume of measures that have delivered and the sort of savings that Dhara was talking about earlier. I think it's 9% of homes in GB have received an eco measure since it first came into being. But it's also clear that the situation identified and referred to last week can't continue. And some of that is about the interplay of the design of eco with the design of the assurance systems around it. And what we have seen, so you referred to social housing, what we see with the capital programmes in relation to social housing especially is that you've got an alignment of incentives where you've got sort of strong social housing providers who own the property, and therefore it's in their interest that the work is done well. The challenge, particularly in relation to the owner-occupied sector for funded schemes, is how do you get that same sort of the same level of checks and balances in the system when the incentives aren't quite the same. So that's what we're trying to work through. We very much see a role for energy suppliers in the transition and the work to tackle fuel poverty. So that's how we're approaching the conversation.
Fantastic. Anybody else want to come in on that question?
Sure.
Please.
You go in.
Thank you.
Don't be too polite, guys. Just talk over each other.
I think that it's really clear that the Minister's interested in how this bit of the policy world and this government's agenda interacts with devolution. I think it's really clear that she's interested in local authority delivery. And I'll just bring it back to partnership again. I think energy suppliers can add a lot of value to local authority-led retrofit. They can be a real delivery vehicle for a lot of the measures, and it comes back to your point about supply chain. I think also suppliers and local authorities together thinking about data to identify people who are eligible, households who are eligible, and coordinating these locally led approaches would also do a couple of things. One is reduce the search costs, which are actually quite expensive, but also give that sort of trusted point of contact, which comes to your point around enforcement. The reality is that we will need to upgrade homes in 3 big ways. One is energy efficiency, making them more efficient, making homes warmer by making it so you spend less, right? And you leak less energy. The other is decarbonising heat. We will have to decarbonise heat. Over 80% of homes in this country are reliant on gas and have central heating. That's disruptive. And we will need to continue to have the conversation about smart meters, about smart products and services that having a smart meter unlocks. Last year, the number of people that took part in the demand flex scheme that the energy system operator puts in place were able to shift demand enough that was equivalent to switching off a small gas plant, right? That's how significant, and that's a very small subset of the population of the 60-something% of people who have a smart meter. So, there's these 3 big changes coming to homes, but the reality is, without the right information protection and support for people, whether you're an owner-occupier or not, you cannot navigate it. And it comes back to the points the Minister was making about the folklore, how you hear about, actually, this was rubbish, or my neighbour had a bad experience, or so-and-so's grandmother had a terrible experience. And we all know, because we're all human and we all have those connections and networks. And I could tell you probably 3 stories of bad customer experience and bad experience with tradespeople that my friends have had. Probably couldn't tell you one good one, and that's because that's what we talk about, because we're human. So things do go wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not just about the advice and information up front. It's about what you do to put it right when they go wrong. So, I think all of that's really interacts with one another. And if we're going to interrupt people's lives, people have busy lives, I would love for us to be in a position where we're talking about all 3 of those angles of the energy changes to homes, not just one of them. Because otherwise, tell you what, in a year's time, you're going to have someone knocking on your door again to say, do you want a heat pump? And then you've got to rip out, you redecorate your wallpaper again. It's all of that. So I think we should be talking about it really holistically.
Caroline, I know you want to come in on this point, and we're going to turn some questions.
Some form of eco is going to be around, because let's be honest, it's a big wodge of money that can't be found anywhere else. I'm a bill payer. I'm paying for it. All those bill payers are paying for it. And that's what we should remember as well in all of this, is that as an energy bill payer who is in, I suppose, a privileged position, that I'm not fuel poor, I want to know that that money is being spent to good end. And whilst you can talk about, the percentage of homes who all benefited from a measure, the question is, what are those measures? And what is really the social good coming out of that? Because our examination of not just eco but other schemes as well, some funded by government, is the strike rate in terms of really focusing on and providing for fuel poor households has been getting worse in our estimation. It's not as good as it should be. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. I mean, Dhara, you mentioned the issue around sort of the leading costs. We looked at some examples whereby for, a basic but really important insulation package, the actual costs that were being charged as part of the eco price for finding people was outweighing almost the cost of doing the work itself. Now that's a really bizarre set of economics at play there. And that's again about, not only about the costs of contacting and finding people, which we should be able to do that better than cold calling, for goodness sake, in terms of what we know about where people are, and that goes to the local engagement on the ground. But also because so many of those lead calls were not being expedited because the person at the other end of the phone in that household thought, is this a scam? Is this a wind-up? Is this something I can trust? Or whatever. And it just didn't happen. So some form of eco is going to be around because it provides big bucks. But fundamentally, it's got to change. And I think, again, it's not just about the mechanisms. I think we need to review the culture of how it operates and whether the energy companies are willing to, dare I say it, cede some oversight and control to those who might be better placed on the ground to do the delivery. Of course, they would have to be accountable. Of course, the energy companies would want to be assured of that. But are we clear about the outcomes we want from eco? Are we clear about what percentage of the money in that is going to bear down on fuel poverty? And are we prepared to work in a different way to get better delivery and better outcomes? And I think that is going to be the challenge going forward to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Caroline. I think the inevitable tension between how much is spent on fuel poverty, how much is spent on wider carbon abatement within our housing stock will be the one that we'll be most keenly interested in come the spending review. But it is important to not drive too much tension between those two agendas, reflecting on the fact that Warmfront, the previously successful self-referral scheme, even if it was sort of grumbled at quite a bit from people in this audience, including myself, it was the most important or most successful carbon abatement programme that the previous government ran. And it also delivered... Oh, go on.
Sorry to interrupt.
I hope you're going to say you're going to announce Warmfront Part 2.
No, but I just wanted to say, sort of slightly in response to the discussion just now, I do think it goes to the questions of definition of fuel poverty that the Minister was talking about. The fact that we have quite for very good policy reasons, quite a tight definition of fuel poverty in legislation drives some, not all of the things that you were talking about, but some of the search costs about sort of, and is the lived experience of that person really so different from their neighbour just because they fall one side of the line or the other? And it's that sort of thing that we've got to think about. And you obviously weigh that up against, we're always under pressure from Treasury to eliminate, reduce deadweight costs and to target them better. But I think it comes back to kind of what's the real world problem that we're trying to address, and how does that feed through into the sort of theoretical policy modelling?
Arena. Yep, it's a fiendishly challenging set of considerations. I think as long as we get that right balance, it will take money, of course. And I would just like to put a bit of fire in the belly of the Minister before she heads off. And I come to you for some questions by saying that there's a lot of money in the energy system. It might be a bit of a surprise to you to know that the Treasury made an additional £40 billion since the energy crisis began, drawn from the pockets of energy consumers through the oil and gas levy, through VAT on your fuel bills, through the UK ETS, through the carbon floor price. This stuff actually makes the Treasury a lot of money. Next year there will be an additional £8 billion, an additional £8 billion compared to the £3 billion that they were getting prior to the energy crisis. So almost £10 billion drawn straight from energy consumers' pockets that we could spend on this stuff. So I hope that gives the Minister some encouragement that it shouldn't be a one-side conversation when we're talking about money and how to pay for stuff. Now, I'm going to come to you. Well, thank you. I want to come to you and ask you some questions. Hopefully we stirred your stumps, particularly with that last spirited intervention by me about money. I've really roused myself for that. That took 3 or 4 cups of coffee, that did. Anyway. And now I'm fatigued and I need to lie down. No, before I do that, we have got 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 13 minutes, I can't even count, for some questions for you. Apologies that we've given such scant amount of time to do that, but next we're going to have some breakouts and we're going to get more and more interactive as this conference progresses. So who would be brave enough to ask us some question, or perhaps just even state your own view? Is this the reset moment for fuel poverty strategy? If not, why not? Tell us. Go on, over there. Oh, you don't have to shout. We're not in the 19th century. Someone's going to come give you a microphone. There we go.
Hiya, Dr. Mary O'Shaughnessy from Caden Gas. My question is, we're doing something called services beyond the meter, which some of the other energy companies do as well. But we can't do measures. And the thing is, you go into a house, you're replacing the boiler, but actually the windows can't be fixed. And we're having to say to somebody, really sorry, but we can't do it for you. We've got to refer you on to another eco-provider, which isn't good for the customer. So I think it's what you said earlier on, can we find some way of working together so we can do the best thing by the customer?
If anybody's got anything to say about that, please.
I mean, absolutely, that's what we want to try and achieve, the better integration of the schemes that are funded nationally, delivered locally, and the mechanism that comes through suppliers. That's got to come together better than it does at the moment. We absolutely recognise the point. I think progress has been made, but there's more to do.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, yes, please, just over there in the green top. Oh, no, no, wrong one. That lady at the front there. Thank you. Sorry, I'll take them in twos. Actually, stop you running around too much.
Hi, so my name's Anika from Carbon Co-op, and so to the best, there's been a lot of conversation about eco that I'm interested in. To the best of my understanding, a big issue with eco is that energy companies are fined if they don't meet certain targets of installation. That drives forward people trying to meet those targets, which will inevitably miss out those that need it the most because of their living situations, their housing situations. It's not an easy... I've talked to people, I've talked to energy advisors who've said, people have told me that I can't have that kind of installation. It's not true that they can't have that kind of installation, but in their home it was slightly more expensive to deal with that installation than it would have been in someone else's home. So it's this dynamic at the core of eco, is my understanding, that's a problem with it. So how does that dynamic get resolved if we are determined to keep eco, to actually do something about fuel poverty?
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm going to take another. Yeah, please, gentleman in a white shirt, just a little bit further up the line. And then I'll come to your side. I know you guys have been a bit quieter, so...
Yeah, this is probably directed towards Caroline. Just to change the talk from eco and insulation. I'm a chief exec of a charity that houses people with learning disabilities. So it's more about part of your strategy. How do we actually provide assistance to those people that need their lights on, need the energy on? The houses are C and rated and above, but they're still in fuel poverty. So it's to understand that that forms part of your strategy as well. How do we get additional funding for them?
Yeah, thank you for your question, sir. Okay, we're going to just take them in twos at the moment, and you're an NEA member of staff, sir, so you will not be prioritised. I've got good enough eyesight to see that. Anyway, on the first question, who would like to take that, please?
I don't mind.
Please, go on, Jessica.
I
Go on,
think,
Laura,
I
go.
think Jessica's probably got a better response than me, but I don't think anybody's saying keep eco exactly the same as what it is. It doesn't necessarily drive the right behaviours. And with the best will in the world, you know, things like bringing down search costs, bringing data points together, they sound really dry and boring, but that is how you unlock the value of these sorts of schemes. So I think it's a fair criticism that perhaps, you know, it needs to be more dynamic and it needs to be more responsive. And that's why I think I've been mentioning the partnership angle with local government. I think that this is also about a trusted point of contact, and that's why working together will be really important.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. So actually I think there's a commonality between the two questions, because what we're talking about is the sort of specificity of schemes and how tightly drawn they are. And it's for very good reasons, because we want to, you know, with limited resources, whether that comes from taxation or from consumers through energy bills, we want to make best use of it, but it can result in schemes becoming very complex, with complex eligibility requirements. And so the example given about somebody living in a home that's C or above, but for that particular individual or household has needs that means their bills are unaffordable, we need to build in some element of discretion and flexibility to reflect the personal circumstances that are actually present. And I think it's that sort of partnership approach that can unlock that.
I think that question, the second question, was particularly pertinent to warm home discount scheme, actually, rather than eco, where you might have lots of appliances plugged in, breathing ventilators, dialysis machines, but that isn't necessarily reflected in an energy performance certificate. Yep. So if you've got deemed to have lower than average energy costs, then you won't get a warm home discount scheme, but you'll still be desperately in need of some support for your energy. And I hope we can cling on to that in the discussion about a wider affordability mechanism, because I think it's absolutely vital and was raised earlier as well. Okay, we're going to...
Shall I do that?
Go on, please. Go on, Caroline, please. Keep us honest.
Just quickly on the eco thing, I do think it's a fair point about the targets, and sometimes even with the best intentions, sometimes targets are set, but when they're actually in operation, they have these sort of, I would say, unforeseen consequences, or at least consequences that people didn't imagine was going to happen. And I think that is a fair point, because it's that, you know, the policy and targets sort of drive behaviour. So I think that is something to be looked at, because, and be able, that's what I mean about agility, to be able to step back a bit and say, let's just stress test this. What would be the scenarios? What would we end up making choices about? But to the gentleman's point about people with disabilities, and thank you for asking that question. I think this is an area that really does speak to how across government we have to look at this in a different way. As I said earlier, I'm chair of an NHS trust in East Yorkshire, where we provide a full range of mental health services. We work with people with learning disabilities and community services. And again, you know, this is something, we will have the data centrally, absolutely, in different forms, and how do we bring that together? But also fundamentally, it's about the people on the ground, because they're all going to live in different types of housing, they'll have different disabilities, they'll have different energy needs impacting upon them. And again, this is where we know that at a local level, the health service can play such an important role, because they already have engagement with a lot of these people. A lot of the voluntary sector, the third sector, are engaged with these households and families as well. And so what is it we can do through, I mean, obviously there's the warm homes discount, and that's being looked at, and of course people with disabilities feature with that as recipients. But on the ground, in terms of not just financial support, but identifying what they need for their homes to be warmer and how they fit into different criteria, is a bottom-up approach rather than just a top-down. And it has to be, given the amount of money it costs the health service, to actually deal with the consequences of not supporting people, particularly when they are vulnerable with their health needs, is an absolute missed opportunity to be able to spend the money better getting in front of the problem than being behind it the whole time. One thing in some discussions I've had with a charity is the fact that people with learning disabilities and those with mental illness are meant to, under NHS guidance and targets, be getting an MOT, a health MOT, every single year. And every trust, including my own, we have to look at figures about what we're doing on that, and there's targets being set. Now again, it's about, if that is happening, and it's actually not enough of it is happening, but where it's happening, where's the conversation about impacts on people's well-being through fuel poverty? How do we make sure that we tighten the grip on making sure every intervention, every contact counts? And that's just a practical thing. I'm a sort of practical person as well as like thinking about policy. And I think that could help us to do this better. But it's a real example. Miata cannot do that on their own. DESNES cannot do this by themselves. All of us in the room need to be advocates to all those other government departments about where they're playing their part too. And that's a really crucial area, which I think would help answer some of your concerns in terms of your question about this group of people.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay. Meeting their targets, though. Eco4 targets, which is good, isn't it? And GBIS not so good, so it's not that hard. Anyway, this side, yes, that we have got their stuff. Is that another NEA person trying to get a question?
No, don't worry. We're Citizens Advice Gateshead. One of the things we've noticed with the EcoFlex scheme is that it's not very good for people in electric-only properties who generally pay more for their heating at the moment as it is. So we've had a few clients who've not had working electric heating for 5-6 years. So they go to gyms if they're still open to try and stay warm. I suppose we've asked the EcoFlex schemes, and what we've generally been told is that if you were to have gas installed in the property, you would be eligible to have the gas removed and a new storage heater put in, but you can't have new storage heaters. And I was just wondering if anything's going to be done to look at electric-only properties?
Unless people that really instinctively want to... Are you going to be here tomorrow, sir? We're going to get into the weeds on this sort of stuff. I just hold your... I don't want you to get too excited by the answer. We will have a big focus on energy efficiency delivery tomorrow, so let's bear that one in mind. Does anybody have any one big question that they want to ask, which they're desperate, which just going to smash this last bit of the session in half before I spoil it by rambling on at the end. Is that? Are you sure? Are you sure it's going to fit this billing? No? Sort of? Okay, go on, give it a go.
Hopefully it'll hit the target. It was really around the, Rachel Jones, Act on Energy. The question was really around the challenge around devolution, particularly around local government. And at the moment, we've been talking quite a lot here about the importance of community and engaging at a local level. I think our concern particularly is when you're looking at geographically, when you're looking at having sort of what I call super shires, so your shires become one big local authority, and how that's going to impact, particularly when we've been talking about the HHSRS and the need for enforcement. It's really important that's done at a local level. And if you're looking at the size of some of these counties that potentially could become big, large unitaries, we're going to lose some of that local delivery, which is really critical, not just for enforcement, but also that wider piece if we're looking at eco, the delivery of the local warm homes grants, etc. So, a bit of a wide question there, but if you get where I'm coming from, Peter.
Thank you, Rachel. So, sort of role of buddying up with lots of local authorities together. And anybody particularly keen on talking to that? Jessica, I'm interested in your view, because you are doing a lot of work to try and galvanise those local authorities that perhaps haven't been able to do much.
Yes. So I suppose what I would say is that the position on devolution is a game changer for this whole agenda. So the presumption in favour of devolution of the capital programmes to the big strategic authorities over the coming years is forcing us to really think about what that means for the national delivery. You can't have devolved funds stop being the exception and start becoming the majority of the funding, and therefore what is the role of national government in that sort of end state? And it's clearly got to be some element of national support to those areas that don't have the capability locally. I mean, that's quite an obvious conclusion, but I think sort of working through like what that actually means in practice, we're very, very live to it.
Fantastic. Well, as long as those areas are in the highest levels of fuel poverty. Caroline, I'm sorry we are at time, and I will get shot because these people need to be eaten, but perhaps not eat. You don't need to be eaten. Sorry, you need to eat. That would have been a horrible way to end the conference.
Can I just say something on local government?
Sorry, please.
I would say that basically we should capitalise on the fact in England we pretty much have regional mayors in every place. They already have partnership arrangements to deal with some issues around net zero. Why don't we give them a strategic responsibility with all their partners in all the combined authorities to tackle fuel poverty? And in that way, we can make sure that the smaller local authorities within that area who really need more support are part of a family of local government to deliver on the ground.
Hear, hear. Well, I think, and a major building up of the previous HECA legislation would be nice as well. All right, well, I hope that has whetted your appetite for what, not just the opportunity that's presented by a new government, a new enthusiasm, a new determination to meet our legal fuel poverty duties, but also how it fits in with wider agendas and what some of the nuggets of opportunity actually look like on the ground. So I hope you found that a useful session. I'm going to wrap up now by asking Michaela if she's still awake. Hello. Oh my God. She always does that. It's like a panto. You're going to talk us through after lunch.
I'm just lurking in the background. So 2 fantastic sessions here this morning. You'll be pleased to know that lunch is being served as we speak in the main exhibition as you go in on your left-hand side. If we can ask you to promptly arrive to the breakout sessions at 2:15 this afternoon. You've got 3 breakout sessions. Breakout session B is in here, which is discussing the rented sector. We've also got breakouts A and C, and to get to those, if you follow the signs that it's been nicely labelled for you past the restrooms out of the main foyer, and you'll be able to find those. So can we give a big round of applause to our panel for this afternoon? Thank you very much.